welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. It is postgame edition number 11 here in 2023. Daniel Gallen alongside me. This is Tyler Donahue. We are fresh out of Beaver Stadium. It is early evening, mid-evening, I suppose now, and not too bad to be recording an episode. It was another noon kickoff, Rutgers and Penn State, and the Nittany Lions ultimately prevailed. 21-point spread, 27-6. A lot more involved to it than that final score, though, Daniel Gallen. Along the way, Drew Allar suffers an apparent injury. We're going to get to that situation in a bit. Beau Pribula comes in, ends up leading the team in rushing yards with 71 of those. And the ground game at large produces their best performance by the game's end of Big Ten play this season. 234 yards on the ground in a 27-6 win. The defense certainly got the job done. 3 takeaways leading to 17 points for Penn State on another interesting day, a journey, you could say, for the offense. Daniel, Penn State improves to 9-2, and they got it done in a different fashion than any of us anticipated it might look in this particular Saturday.
Certainly. You think about what, I don't know, 2 months ago, we were here after the West Virginia game, our first game in Beaver Stadium, kind of what we thought, our expectations for the season after that game. And today it was our final time in Beaver Stadium, and kind of how our expectations have changed with reality and some of the reality on the field with what we saw happen to Drew Allar today, what we saw from Beau Pribula, how we saw this offense really work through the latter part of the game. But I think that you look at it, and I'm sure that when we get in there on Monday, James Franklin is going to be sure to point out that winning is tough to do in college football. He's going to mention some losses that have already happened today, and a couple that could also be in the works. And he's going to say they're really happy to be in the position that they are in. 9-2 now, the chance to win 10 games in back-to-back seasons, put themselves in position for a New Year's Six Bowl when we go out to Detroit next week. So I think that how Penn State has done this over these past couple of weeks, definitely not how we thought they would, but the results are kind of, in terms of win-loss, wouldn't be a surprise if you told us a couple months ago that we'd be here at 9-2.
Yeah, 9-2 is precisely kind of underneath where we were, though. I shouldn't say it's where we thought. We all had them going 11-1, so I don't want to change expectations now that we're to this point. But yeah, 9-2 is kind of where you've been accustomed to seeing them come out of the Rutgers game at this point in the season. And this was, quite honestly, just the same old script that we've seen in this series going back the last 8-9 years, since that one that was pretty thrilling. The first time that Rutgers poked its head into the Big Ten, it was the first time that James Franklin coached in a conference matchup in Piscataway back in 2014. 13-10 went down to the wire. Since then, Penn State's margin of victory has been 13 plus points. That was the case here. Every single year, we went over some of those halftime scores on the pregame podcast, especially in Beaver Stadium. It's a 1-score deficit at halftime. Maybe it's a 3-point lead or a 4-point lead. Today it was 10-6, and Rutgers got the ball first to open the second half. So kind of right where we thought it would be. Daniel, you actually said that Rutgers would be leading late in the first half when you were predicting this matchup. You said it would be tied 10-10 at halftime. You were pretty damn close. Rutgers was able to drive late in that first half. I think this is probably the most legitimate, for a certain stretch of this game, pass attack that Rutgers had put on display at any point against Penn State in this series, as far as I can remember, because Gavin Wimsatt on that particular field goal drive at the end of the half goes 3 pass completions that go 15 plus yards each. And you're wondering, okay, is this quarterback finding something all of a sudden in Beaver Stadium? And you're going into halftime, and your quarterback hasn't found what he's looking for. But ultimately, the second half proves to be, again, by the script against Rutgers. 17-0 unanswered points the rest of the way. The defense stifles Rutgers. They get their takeaways. Rutgers fails to execute in Penn State territory, a couple of opportunities there. And so while the final score and the process to get there was very familiar for us, Daniel, and one that we anticipated, we each said 20-point deficit. We said 30-10, each of us. And we said it's going to meander through the first half, and then you're going to see Penn State pull away. We think we both predicted that the ground game would find its form in the second half and really grind down Rutgers. All that happened. But, man, the cast of characters were different this time, and their journeys were very unique. And we got to start with the starting quarterback in Drew Allar, who did not finish this game involved. He was sidelined in the third quarter. Again, being more involved as a runner in this matchup. It's something that we've seen pop up the last few weeks of him being, by necessity, it would seem, involved more in that way. And he was not able to kind of find the ground fast enough. He had a defender pop him. And on one play later, he kind of sends a ball, airmails to the staff, and they're like, "Okay, let's get." Everyone kind of knows. I think Drew knows before that ball's even hits the ground that he's working his way to the sideline. Goes straight to the medical tent. I noted on the way there, Devon Ellis, who's kind of the heartbeat, it feels like, of this team in a lot of ways right now, embraced him, had some words, exchanged them in his ear, and then Drew Allar just made his way to the medical tent. He resurfaced a little while later, had his helmet in his hand. Never came back, and we were keeping eyes on him. Daniel, what did you see from Drew Allar? Let's start there through the process I just described and for the remainder of the day. And I'll just put this out there in terms of details here. James Franklin, not going to get into them, but he did say he didn't consider this to be a significant injury. And by that, I think you would mean something that's going to end the remainder of his season. But James Franklin also cautioned us and himself in some ways and saying it's still very early and we're gathering information. So he didn't want to get ahead and say something. But I guess it's good that he's right off the bat not saying, "Hey, guys, this doesn't look good." And he was on the sideline for the remainder of the matchup. Before we get to Beau Pribula and Drew Allar's performance before that injury, what do you make of that sequence in the third quarter?
It was a really interesting sequence when you put everything back to back to back, especially in the moment. I mean, Drew Allar did take a really big hit. I believe it was Flip Dixon, defensive back from Rutgers, really popped them. And there's been a couple times this year where Drew Allar has taken hits, and in the press box, there's kind of like an ooh, because
Oh, yeah.
he's the quarterback, and he's someone where that's not really part of his game, or at least it wasn't really billed as part of his game. So you see that happen, and I thought he got back up. It didn't necessarily seem like anything was amiss immediately, and then he gets back there, and as soon as the snap gets to him, it was a very awkward throw to get it out. It was almost like he just sort of pushed it over the head of the receiver out there, and he immediately walks off. Beau Pribula jogs on. Allar goes into the medical tent. Was in there for quite a while. I know that.
I think I timed it at about 5-6 minutes. Yeah, and that's enough where you're like, there's some serious evaluation happening right now.
It's a span of time where when you just say 5 or 6 minutes, it doesn't feel like a long time. But in the moment, when there's another clock that's ticking down and there's stuff happening, it does feel like a long time. And then he came out and he just sort of spent a lot of time flexing his right hand, moving his right arm, touching his shoulder, kind of feeling that out there. He eventually put on the beanie. And looked pretty dejected and was off to the side a little bit. I felt, but I felt as the half went on, he got a little bit more and more involved. And I think I was looking through the binoculars at one point during a timeout, and he and Danny O'Brien, the GA who's working with the quarterbacks right now, they were having a discussion, and O'Brien was gesturing to something on the field, and they were having a little back and forth about something. So Allar was engaged. Talked to some of the players, and they said that like Theo Johnson and Olu Fashanu, they said that they went over to him on the sideline and told him that they had him, that whatever he was going through, they had his back, not to worry about it. James Franklin said that as the game went on, that he thought that Drew had really, really good leadership. So it's definitely going to be something to monitor. I mean, you looked at the pain that he seemed to be in when he came out of the tent and was moving his arm, trying to flex it. It looked like he was trying to kind of gauge his mobility. It was something that didn't look super. It didn't look good, but at the same time, like you mentioned, he stayed in uniform the whole time, and then he was out there the whole time. With some of these injuries, they take guys in, you never see them again, or they take them in, they come out in street clothes, something along those lines. So I'm curious to see what James Franklin has to say when we get the chance to talk to him next week about what exactly is going on with Allar and where he is health-wise.
Next week comes fast because we get James at noon on Monday, and that's certainly going to be a topic of discussion. And before that injury, Drew Allar on the day, 6 of 13 passing. I guess that last incompletion was post injury, and it kind of reminded me, by the way, of when you see maybe a pitcher just say, "Oh, something's wrong with my elbow," like something they note something strange right after one of those throws that just goes like 2 feet wide of the glove, and you're like, okay, that was strange. That's what that felt like. It was like, oh, something mechanically that he usually can depend on, or physically, I guess you should say, is not working in order. And so Drew was almost surprised. It seemed like as a result of that throw. But getting back to his day before that, 6 of 12, 79 yards passing. He did make some plays with his legs, and that's something we actually saw him go for a career high yardage on the ground against Michigan after he went for a career high yardage on the ground against Maryland. I don't know if that's necessarily a trend that you want brewing for Drew Allar right now, but the passing numbers, Daniel, overall, this team has gone sub 100 yards passing in back-to-back games. They did it differently to get to the finish line. I don't want to shortchange how they did it. I mean, Michigan did it a little bit in similar fashion against them last year coming here and didn't make J.J. McCarthy throw a pass. But they did it with Katron Allen. Nick Singleton got involved late. We'll talk about those things. And Beau Pribula, of course. But before that, it was just, again, just jointed from the passing game perspective. Those numbers are not pretty. From the receiver perspective, a lot of guys were involved. You were counting 7 different receivers on the first 2 series for Penn State. And by the time we got through 2 series, we were like halfway through the second quarter because these drives were long early on. But you had 2 receivers catch passes in this game. Each of them actually caught 1 pass. And naturally, it was Omari Evans, 1 catch for 25 yards. And then, of course, Liam Clifford, who I think had played maybe a dozen snaps cumulatively the last few weeks at wide receiver, 1 catch for 15 yards. That was it at receiver. And really for Drew Allar, it just, you didn't see that comfort level really rise up. And I know it's a very uncomfortable week, and we kind of laid out why that was the case. When you lose your offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, and you're tasking your tight ends coach and your running backs coach with being the guys at the forefront there, and James Franklin and Danny O'Brien taking on bigger roles, there's a lot on the plate. You get a win here. Unfortunately, you also get an injury with Drew Allar, but the performance was not confidence inducing. And we talked about how important it is for Drew Allar and him and everything he's going to do here down the stretch. And we got to kind of put an asterisk now because there's an injury that we have to monitor. But you want it to be confidence inducing, to take you into the December bowl preparation on a high note, to take you into this offseason where nationally, but here locally and internally, that you feel like quarterback is an obvious strength for the Nittany Lions going into 2024. You don't want to be questioning that logic at all. And unfortunately, of late, aside from that Maryland matchup on the road where he really put it together and he was all smiles, we just have not seen it come together. And it's pretty much at this point about a half season sample size we're going to be working with when it comes to the sophomore quarterback.
Definitely. I think one thing that kind of stood out to me as we were watching this was that it looked the same as what we've been seeing for much of the year. And I know that, like, personally, I wasn't expecting the structure of the offense to look that much different. You fire Mike Yurcich, but you're not going to install the triple option. You're not going to install the air raid. You're not going to, completely overhaul it over the course of the week. It's still going to be the same system. And I think that we did see some wrinkles in there in terms of the personnel that got involved. I think we saw a couple different formations at different times that I thought were interesting. So I think from that perspective, it was kind of like, yeah, I mean, this offense structurally has not been able to do much. At times this year, has struggled to do a lot. So going up against a solid defense like Rutgers, that wasn't the biggest surprise, but I do think it was a little disappointing to see sort of the same Drew Allar. He got let down on that opening possession where he rifles the ball across the middle and it goes through Dante Cephas's hands and then somehow finds Tyler Warren's hands, and neither of them can hang on to it. I thought that was a pretty kind of indicative of how this offense has run this year. You saw another play where it was down near the goal line where Cephas, I think Allar was maybe expecting him to break further out than he did. So it was a ball that was just kind of thrown to nowhere on the right side, and Cephas was in the area.
There
And
was
that,
also a throw to Cephas that Cephas was clearly interfered with from our vantage point. I mean, at least you could
oh
have.
yeah,
There was a strong case where if that doesn't happen, maybe that changes the way we view Drew Allar's day and how what happens at the goal line there. They came up short. They settled for a field goal. It was a disappointing result, and I think that was a missed call. But at the end of the day, you're right. It wasn't like we saw a kind of a reinvigorated Drew Allar. I don't want to put where his mental mindset is. I'm just saying what we're seeing between those 6 seconds when the whistles blow, it wasn't a step forward for the sophomore.
yeah. I was talking about the sequence where Penn State was pinned back. I forgot about the
Oh, that one,
Cephas
yes, that may have been their worst possession of the
DPI.
season. I mean, that may
Yeah,
have been the ugliest possession that didn't result in a turnover for them of the season.
yeah, because you missed Cephas on the out, and then on third down, it was kind of that weird non-committal half throw that Aller did to Cephas when he was running over the middle, way short of the sticks to begin with, and that fell incomplete. So I think that you just keep seeing those same mistakes, and I do think that those are the types of mistakes that you don't solve those by firing the offensive coordinator. That those are things that the players need to figure out, and maybe you need to spend the offseason working on that. I mean, it just kind of popped into my head while you were talking about what's coming up for Penn State, and you mentioned bowl prep. And if Aller isn't healthy and can't necessarily do bowl prep, that's something that could be a potential setback a little bit moving forward when you talk about getting as much practice time as you can get, because from what from what we understand, they need to get on the same page. A lot of people need to figure a lot of things out. And if you get those 15 extra practices or however many it is in December, that can be pretty big for certain players. So we got to get through we got to get through next week first, see where everything is health wise overall. But it was just kind of like, I wasn't expecting to see something totally different. I thought maybe we would see a little bit of a reinvigorated offense, maybe a little bit of a freer, a little bit more loose Drew Allar. Maybe if he hits on that throw to Tyler Warren, touchdown pass to Dante Cephas, where Cephas got grabbed pretty early, maybe that sets things up a little differently. But the fact is, it didn't happen, and we got more of the same Drew Allar that we've seen recently.
I think we'll have a lot more to talk about Drew Allar on Monday. We can kind of put a pin in it for now, because it's the prevalent topic right now, not just for how you want to see this team finish 2023, but how you realistically view what they can accomplish in 2024 when you open to a 12-team playoff, but you also bring into the Big Ten Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington. So there's a big trade-off with those two things. And so let's get to the situation here, just passing game overall. This is games where Drew Allar's out in the fourth quarter. It's the way that it's approached the fourth quarter that plays into it here. But overall, this team, you go back to game one, 332 yards through the air, 300 plus of those accounted by the wide receiver room alone. That was game one, our first view of what the Drew Allar-led offense might look like under Mike Yurcich. They have fallen below 250 total passing yards as an offense in their next 10 games, and they have fallen below 100 passing yards in the last 2 games. And you just don't know where Drew Allar is, and you don't know medically and physically what kind of ground he might need to make up between now and what's going to be a short week, a Friday night kickoff in Detroit. What goes into that? What are the risk rewards of getting him on the field Friday against Michigan State in a game where, if you handle your business offensively, even if you approach it in a similar fashion that to the second half today, may not be ugly, but against Michigan State this year, probably gets the job done, probably gets you to 10 wins. And that you just wonder if this is if the curtain goes down on Drew Allar's regular season here. The conversation is just so different in December for a 10-win team about the quarterback position. And I'll just remind us, and I'll keep hammering it home over all of our heads, for a quarterback who has 25 total touchdowns and 1 interception. It's so funny this year how some of the window dressing for Penn State, and I don't want to call it that because those wins matter, but this team gets to 10 wins. Drew Allar in the process has 25 plus total touchdowns and 1 or 2 turnovers on the entire regular season. it's just hard to imagine that you would get to this point and then feel like you're really concerned about where the offense is trending, and you've already fired the offensive coordinator. But that's what it really is right now. It's just an interesting juxtaposition to me, Daniel, because some of the numbers look pretty, and even the win-loss, as much as we're going to dwell, and a lot of people are going to dwell on the Ohio State-Michigan matchups, 10 wins is 10 wins, and you still value that at the Power 5 level. And yet here we are, and the central conversation before we get to some of the other stuff is what's going to happen at quarterback and what has happened at quarterback. And you take us over to Beau Pribula, because it was a different journey once he got involved.
Yeah, I think one thing to go off of what you were just talking about with what the final numbers are going to look like, there's definitely an element of you have to kind of you have to factor in the process and the results. You have to figure out how to weigh those differently, where you got these results, but how did you get them? What did it look like? I think that when we really do the autopsy this offseason, that's probably something that we're going to look at a lot. But and we saw something different from the Penn State offense today. Once Drew Allar went out, Beau Pribula came in. We had seen him a little bit earlier in the game in the first half. We had the Pribula package with both Allar and Pribula on the field at the same time. I don't believe that play really did much when it happened, but then Pribula came in, and it was the full-time Pribula package, and it was pretty much what we'd seen when Pribula had gotten extended run. The difference was, instead of in the fourth quarter of these games that are out of reach, he's in there in a one-score game in the third quarter, and they're running like this. I think that you do have to factor in how the Penn State defense was playing, how the Rutgers offense was playing. Even though Gavin Wimsatt had some really nice plays, especially in the first half, I felt like making plays with his legs and his arm. I was pretty impressed with him today. But at the same time, he didn't necessarily scare you. Like, you didn't really have that feeling where it was kind of like, oh no, this guy can win the game. This could get out of hand. So I do feel like that probably played into Penn State a little bit in terms of how they handled things and how they really, really leaned on this. I also felt like that they kind of just put the game in the hands of their offensive line and put the game in the hands of being physical, which is something that we haven't seen on a lot of occasions this year. But Pribula came in. He did some really nice things with his legs. I mean, his first snap, he breaks off a 39-yard run, which ties Tank Smith for the longest run by a Penn State player this year. Yeah, exactly. We're talking about Tank Smith and Beau Pribula as the home run hitters in the running game in late November. But then I think that you look at how Pribula did. I mean, he kept the defense honest with his arms, with his legs. Nick Singleton got a couple things going. He broke off a couple nice runs. Katron Allen was Katron Allen again. And you started to see things open up a little bit for that run game. I think that if you're Penn State and you kind of look at this and move it forward, I think the big question is, all right, how do we get the run game to work like this without having Pribula in there, without having that, making it an 11 men you have to account for. I'm sure that's something that is going to be looked at this offseason, but I just thought that Pribula allowed them in this type of game where you're basically trying to get out with the win. You have the lead. You're trying to survive. You don't need many fireworks. I thought that Pribula did a very nice job of just kind of doing what was asked of him.
And again, isn't this very much how Michigan approached the second half last week here in Beaver Stadium? It was we don't fear the opposing offense. They don't scare us. We're not worried about playing that game with our defense with a one-score game, and we're going to let our offensive line and our running game wear it down. It might take a few series, but they're going to break down the door. And we saw Penn State do it. And to their credit, we'll get to the offensive line because there were some interesting things there. Some other guys involved for extended work, especially in the second half, that maybe we were accustomed to or anticipating in this matchup, especially as close as it was. But let's talk about the other elements of the ground game. And by the way, if Beau Pribula is going to be your starter against Michigan State, I mean, Penn State's not going to have a choice. We're going to have to see some of the passing game. And if we don't, it's kind of a discredit, I think, to Beau Pribula as a quarterback, as a guy who's been very committed to sinking his teeth into the position, was recruited at the position. We talked about it as a recruit on this podcast. and with him during his process that he could have been a Power 5 prospect at other spots on the field at the Power 5 level. So I would like to, if he gets a chance to play extensively here, and it's kind of his show offensively, and I don't know that it will be, but I think it would do a favor to this offense, or do a favor to Beau Pribula to at least give it a shot to get some balance to this thing. But again, they're just trying to survive, maybe get to those 10 wins. And if they feel like the better way to do that is to go 85% run against Michigan State and make that work, then maybe they make that work. But how about the rest of the run game there? And Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton. It was Allen's show early. He's the guy who got the start. He did get a touchdown in this matchup, 2 touchdowns actually. And along the way, he has really, in a weird moment for this offense, in a really frustrating moment for this offense in the last few weeks, 4-week sample size now, where he's getting a dozen plus carries a game. He's over 5 yards per carry, 5.2 yards per carry now. He's at 313 rushing yards the last 4 games. It is a shared load situation. He was at 16 carries today. Nick Singleton at 11. Beau Pribula ends up popping up with 8 carries. And then Drew Allar had 3 carries for 28 yards. So still not getting the 25 carries that you maybe be curious what Kaytron Allen could do with over the course of a matchup. But he showed up to work. He brought that authority. And again, he's a guy that will not really be denied by one defender.
I think that Kaytron Allen is really the main player who's been as advertised this season. I think it's taken him a little bit to get going, but these last 4 weeks, I think it's the Kaytron Allen that we saw last year and what he's been able to do and how he's able to play. And I think that that's been something that we've talked about, that Penn State needs to find the guys that are going to show up on a weekly basis and guys that you're going to get what you expect out of them, which hasn't been the case. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to some of the wide receiver stuff, but Keandre Lambert-Smith was absent.
Short conversation tonight, man.
Yeah. I mean, Omari Evans and Liam Clifford as your 2 wide receivers with catches. I mean,
no one had catches. They had catch.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, those are guys that week in and week out, you don't know what you're going to get out of your wide receivers. I think Tyler Warren has maybe been the most consistent player this entire season, but that's your kind of 1B tight end. Where
Can I say something about Tyler Warren before I forget to mention it?
Yeah.
4 straight games, 19 plus yard catch. I mean, this is a guy that we've kind of framed as doing it within the 9 to 12 yard range, and then getting tough yards after the catch, or doing it on like a 3-yard pass up by the goal line. He's showing some explosive traits to his package. And right now, you put together the highlight reel from what he's done as a blocker, from what he's done now downfield vertically, and certainly what he's done near the line of scrimmage as a receiver. This is a really balanced tight end that has come along in year 4.
Exactly. And he's someone that he's a 4th-year player, redshirt junior, walked for senior day, was spending a lot of time on the field after the game. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think that you look at Warren, and I think he's really the only player from week 1 to week 11 that has, I think, been consistent there. But I'd say
Olu. If we're talking offense at large, but I mean,
I'm going skills, like skill guys.
Yeah, and he is really the guy who's done it start to finish. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, but Kaytron Allen has kind of joined him now these last couple of weeks, and I think that that's been a good sign for the offense because, I mean, the tight ends, no matter how good he is, maybe at most, like, you're giving your tight end 8 targets, 8 catches, something along those lines. That's not necessarily a position that is super high volume, whereas you can give Kaytron Allen the ball 16 times and get 69 yards from him. So I think that seeing Kaytron Allen kind of round into that form, I think is really a positive for this offense, because it's been tough. I think there's been so many of these Fridays or these Thursday pods where we sit down and we're trying to forecast who's going to step up. And we're kind of like, okay, maybe it's Nick Singleton this game. Maybe this is finally going to be Dante Cephas. Maybe Keandre Lambert-Smith will get it here. Maybe Caden Saunders is going to spin something forward from a game. And it just kind of, it never happened. But I think that if Kaytron Allen, if he's establishing a baseline for you and is doing that week in and week out, it just makes things just a little bit easier. And I think that he's probably relieved a little bit of pressure on this offense over the past month.
Something this offense did really well with today was staying ahead of the chains, and avoiding those third and long situations against Rutgers. 4 for 9. Now they didn't have a ton of possession, so that brings down your third down opportunities. But it just felt like they didn't find themselves in a lot of third down opportunities, and those numbers reflect it. And when they did, pretty good conversion rate comparatively to where they've been of late, which has not been in a good place on third downs. But Katron Allen is a big part of that reason. I think late in the game, Beau Pribula was another significant part of that reason. And then it felt like for 3.5 quarters, Daniel, more the same story with Nick Singleton. More of man, how did Nick Singleton kind of miss that opportunity? There's been chances there where it just feels like there's room for him to maneuver and go chase down yardage or chase down touchdowns. And for one reason or another, he just hasn't located them. And you kind of combine that with just some of the issues of him being able to find space, and just hasn't come together for one reason or the other. The last 3 games, as we said, hadn't reached even 10 yards on the ground. And that was the case on a single rush. And that was the case through 3.5 quarters, really. Then he goes 20 yards and he goes 12 yards. And man, to think that we would be parsing through Nick Singleton's carries last year to find a 20-yard gain and a 12-yard gain and spotlight it like this, it kind of shows where Nick Singleton has been production-wise as a sophomore. But we got to cast a spotlight because there was a couple runs there where, and unfortunately, it looked like for a second he might have been banged up after that 20-yard run toward the sideline, a little slow to get up, but he returned 12-yard run. You really hope that he found something. And when you have an elite athlete like this who's proven it before and actually has the track record, we're not waiting on it. We're waiting on Drew Allar to produce at a Power 5 level like a 5-star. We've already seen Nick Singleton produce at the Power 5 level like a 5-star. He was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year last year. So when you're talking about something that's maybe a little mental involved into the whole aspect, a moment like this, if you're Jaywan Slater, you cling to this possession. I think you hammer home. What did you find? What do we do right? How do we keep it going early on? Because it's Nick Singleton week in Detroit. He's in line to get that start in the rotation. So I expect him to be the first man up at running back against the Spartans.
Yeah, I think that when you look at Nick Singleton and the running game, when I'm watching a game, I try really hard not to be like, oh, he should have hit that hole. He should have done this because, oh, I don't know what the call is. As James Franklin would point out, sometimes we don't know what the assignments are, what the call is, what all the details are. But I think there was one play in the first half today where it was pretty obvious that Nick Singleton made a wrong read. I think it was down near the goal line, and I felt like if he had just kept going to the right and followed Theo Johnson, he was probably going to make it into the end zone. And it was a time where I was kind of like, think through the binoculars, I could see it, and I was just like, oh, that was really rough. But I have up in front of me, I mean, the way that he closed the game in the fourth quarter on that drive, 20 yards, 9 yards, 12 yards, all of which went for first downs, and then he got stopped short of the goal line with a 2-yard run on from the 3. And I think that seeing that from Nick Singleton, I think, is a really big positive. Maybe he was benefiting from Beau Pribula being in the game. Maybe he was benefiting from Katron Allen having really worn Rutgers down a little bit with what he was able to do. But I think that no matter what your qualifier is, I think the fact that we saw Nick Singleton doing these things, I think, is a really, really big positive. He had a little bit of juice on a kickoff return. I thought that's kind of been there, kind of in the background a little bit this year. He had the 250-yarders earlier, and then he had another nice one today. But seeing it in kind of the flow of the offense, I think, was a really, really big positive. And so I think you look at it for Penn State, if you're Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell designing this offense moving forward, it's, okay, how do we get this from Nick Singleton in the first quarter? What was working? How can we make this independent of Beau Pribula or Katron Allen? How can we channel that for Nick Singleton? And I'm really curious to see what that actually looks like, because like you talked about, he's up next in the rotation. The way that that's worked is he'll probably get the first quarter, which means that he'll have the opportunity to set the tone on maybe at least 2 drives, depending on game flow. If it's if it's a little bit different than it was today. So what are we seeing from Nick Singleton early on? I think he's been it's been an enigma a little bit this year in terms of what has actually been going on, why we're seeing this type of performance from him. But I thought we saw flashes at good points today. So he's just got to do it again on Friday in Detroit.
You mentioned did he benefit from Beau Pribila's presence? Yeah, no, I mean, yes, unequivocally he did, and so did Kaytron Allen, and so did that ground game overall. And we knew that they would. James Franklin has told us repeatedly that when Beau Pribula is in the game, the defense has to just prepare for a different kind of threat, and they can't get away with certain things. And in this case, Beau Pribula was able to outrun and outmuscle some Rutgers defenders in some key situations. He went 30 plus yards in that first carry. And I think hindsight being 2020, and we're allowed to do it, he didn't play at all against Michigan or Ohio State. During all those frustrating offensive possessions that were clanking and clunking around the field against Ohio State and Columbus, and then in Beaver Stadium against Michigan last week, Mike Yurcich didn't find the time or the motivation, and I'll put it on Mike Yurcich, but it's the staff at large. We know James Franklin's the head coach here, but we know that it's something that they've been teasing for a while, and for it to not show up in the two biggest games of the year, and they were the two biggest games of the year, and in two games where your offense was mightily struggling. Now that we've seen what it looks like with Beau Pribula on the field time and time again, I think that's a tough look for this staff. I think it's a real tough look.
Yeah, I wrote about it in the rewind this week, where you didn't see it at all against Ohio State and Michigan. You only really saw it against Maryland. And so it's kind of like, all right, like, what was your goal by deploying it then? Did you just want to take up like 5 minutes of practice time from Michigan, or 10 minutes? And because if that's all you wanted to do, I think that is just sort of overthinking things completely. Whereas I think that if you have something like that, you have to use it. I think that keeping it theoretical and trying to be like, all right, well, if we have the specter of this, that it's something that they'll be thinking about, it's going to be in the back of their head, they're going to prepare for it, and then we're not going to show it. I think the problem with Penn State was that, all right, you didn't show that, but you didn't show anything else that was unique or interesting, or maybe even a little dangerous there. It just really, really struck me as kind of a sort of almost like what was the point? By the time we got to Ohio State and Michigan, and the fact that we didn't see it. But it does kind of raise some questions. I mean, I was of the mindset that if Drew Allar is this quarterback that you think he is, and that we all believe he has the ceiling of, then you never take the ball out of his hands under any circumstance. But I think during that Ohio State game, and then again against Michigan, it became clear that he's not that quarterback right now. And we saw a willingness from Mike Yurcich to take the ball out of Drew's hands and put it in Keandre Lambert-Smith's or Kaytron Allen's to throw the ball in different scenarios. So I think that that's something that in hindsight is just really, really baffling, especially when you see that it worked today, that it was efficient. It kept an offense on the field, which is something that, especially in that Ohio State game, was not happening at all. So that's one that I think I don't think we'll ever get an answer on why we didn't see it. I know that James Franklin said in the Ohio State game that they were just going 3 and out too many times, and he wanted to wait until they were in a rhythm to put it out there. But I think that in the Michigan game, I think that stands out as the bigger missed opportunity, given what you knew about Allar, what you'd already seen from him, and how you saw this work against Maryland. The fact that you had just put it on film, and now you can build off of it a little bit. So that's one that, that's another one for the autopsy that I think we're gonna come back to a couple times.
Yeah, and it's not just something that James Franklin had mentioned, using the two quarterbacks, not something that popped up in September. It's something that he was really emphasizing to us whenever the topic came up about Beau Pribula, is, since felt like March, since they got back on the practice field, and for it to set up, and you thought once they teased it in Maryland and really ran it up the goal line, of course it's going to pop up against Michigan. It has to, Come on, you're looking for a spark anywhere. You're not getting it from your running back. You look for, and we saw Beau Pribula first play of this game. He goes 39 yards, I think it was, down and off to the races. And that really gave Penn State momentum that they never really relinquished along the way. Getting over to the offensive line briefly here. And again, we'll dive into a lot of this more in detail coming out of James Franklin's press conference on Monday when we sit down with Mark Brennan for our next podcast. But 6 yards per rush they finish with. No sacks allowed on the day. Obviously, there wasn't much passing involved after the third quarter. But you look at what this offensive line did today, and you look at who was involved. It was a lot of Venga Ioane again, and Salim Wormley and JB Nelson. But Venga was the guy for the most part at guard during the final stretch of this game. I got to go back and check on that, but it felt like that. And I think that we were picking up on that possession by possession. And then Drew Shelton got extended run in the second half as they really found their way at right tackle. And we talked about and wrote about this week how important it's going to be to make sure he's getting his opportunities, because he's going to be either your starting left tackle or your starting right tackle next year. We're not sure where he's going to be needed more and what the rest of the personnel things are going to dictate. But he played a lot, and when he was out there, this offensive line was able to get it done on the ground and wear down Rutgers. And as Katron Allen said, you could sense it as the game wore on, that Penn State's that Rutgers defenders were getting testy, and they knew that they was slipping away from them, and then Penn State was able to pounce on that.
Yeah, I think that seeing that those different combinations be able to be physical, to push Rutgers back a little bit. You know, there was the one play where Beau Pribula got stopped on a fourth down sneak, and it looked like the line got a good push. I think that something on that replay, I'll have to go back to watch it again, but it felt like to me that Beau Pribula left his feet a little bit early on that, and wasn't able to completely drive through to get the yardage that he needed. But I think that you saw you didn't really notice when Drew Shelton was out there. You didn't really notice when Venga Ioane was out there. We saw Nick Dawkins out there at center too, and it was kind of the thing where things were functioning as they had been when the starters were out there. So I think that this offensive line, it's going to look a lot different next year. You've got a lot of guys who can move on, and you've got a bunch of guys who are in different kind of areas of their career where, Hunter Norzad out of eligibility, Olu Fashanu going to the NFL, and then Salim Wormley and Caden Wallace are fifth-year guys who are kind of in that in-between a little bit with deciding whether or not to stay, to go. Do you really want to be in college for 6 years? Do you want to figure out what's next? It's an interesting spot. And so to see some of that depth in there on senior day at home, some younger players, gives you a little bit of a preview, I think, for what this group could look like. And I think to see them perform well, I think that's a big benefit. I think that this offensive line this year has had a couple issues here and there. I think that we've seen it with some of the stunts that opposing teams have run to get free rushers coming up the middle. There's been some plays in the short yardage plays this year have been it feels like they've been a lot more difficult than last year, a little bit more of a struggle at times. But there is some talent here, and I think Penn State is gonna have to, Phil Troutline's gonna have to put the puzzle back together next year in a very different way. And we got a little bit of a look today at what some of those pieces might be.
I think on an ideal afternoon for the offense, and as we've covered on the show, it was not an ideal day, and things happen. But you probably would have wanted to stack up more points, have that better offensive efficiency to start this game, and then been able to finish the game with some of the young pups out there on the offensive line. Javen Williams is a guy I know they want to get more game opportunities for. Anthony Donka at guard. Both of those players in year 2 next year could be in a position where you're counting on them to kind of be at the forefront of a position battle at those respective positions. And so because this game's hanging in the balance, it is what it is. Give Rutgers some credit, and we have to acknowledge Penn State's offense wasn't able to put this one away until late. So you didn't get a chance to get those guys out in the field. Does it happen against Michigan State? I don't know. But to your point, there's potentially a major changeover happening on the offensive front. You got a little bit of a look at some pieces that are going to be in place next year. Dawkins is one of them, but we'll find out about some of the other ones. Daniel, let's go to the defensive side of the football, where I think we can go on some individual efforts, but before acknowledging just a solid day for the defense. Although, again, I think Rutgers was able to move the ball to their credit, and more efficiently than we've seen Rutgers do against this particular Penn State team year after year after year, and coming off a game in which they were shut out against Iowa. Chalk that up to some success for Kirk Shiraka's game plan, maybe chalk it up to some not awesome moments for the Penn State defense. But in individual performances, there's a few guys I think worth spotlighting. We got to start with Chop Robinson. We saw it early against Michigan before they decided not to throw the ball anymore and changed his kind of role and his factor in that matchup. Well, today he was just a nasty presence for Rutgers. He was everywhere. We got him after the game. I know he's feeling very confident in what he's able to accomplish, but 5 tackles on the day, 2 of them come behind the line of scrimmage. One's a sack. And in case anyone forgot the impact this guy can make since he left the second quarter against Ohio State, there's a big reminder, Daniel Gallen, of just what an impact 44 makes on the front end of this defense.
That strip sack of Gavin Wimsatt was just a very, very impressive individual play, because you saw how quickly Chop got off the line and how quickly he was in the backfield. And it's one of those plays where you can just see it coming, and you're kind of like, does he know? Like, does he realize what's about to happen? It reminded me a little bit of last year when Curtis Jacobs got in there and forced the fumble that Jair Brown returned for a touchdown, where it's a guy who is just in the backfield immediately to make a play. And that's the Chop Robinson that I think that we thought we were going to see for much of this year. Having that injury against Ohio State and getting sidelined for a couple games, I think that this defense did miss him. But I think that today was just such a good reminder of what he's able to do, and just kind of a nice reminder of what happens when you have an edge rusher like that, who is able to, really flip a game by himself, cause some havoc. He was doing it from both edges. It was just very, very cool to see that kind of performance from a pass rusher today.
And we know that he can rush from the interior as well,
Yeah.
based on some of the work he's done this year. And I was having a conversation with you, I think it was before the game or may have been early in this game, just kind of where Chop Robinson stands right now, because it felt like a kind of a foregone conclusion that, yeah, he's a guy that he's going to go to the NFL because he's going to stack up a full season's work here. But, things hit a bit of an abrupt change in a showcase game against Ohio State. He's not available for most of it. He misses a couple matchups, including that trip back to Maryland, which would have been an interesting one for him. And then the way the Michigan game goes, it kind of limits what he can actually put out there and some of his best traits that I think the NFL scouts are coveting with him. And we get to this point, and he puts this performance up, and then you kind of say, well, a couple more games here, what can he produce? What do you think Chop Robinson is? And it's obviously a personal decision, and we don't know a lot of the other things that are going to go into that when he makes it. But it feels like if he were to come back, it's all still there for him. And selfishly, I know we would like to see him put together an entire season. You just wonder what that could look like and what it could mean in terms of going from, I don't know, maybe a fringe first rounder. I don't know where he is. I don't know where the industry analysts have. But if he can come and look like he did today for an extended period of time as a senior, how much more could that change what a rookie contract might look like?
Definitely. I think that he plays a premium position, and if he were to come back and put together the season that we think he's capable of, I mean, you'd certainly play his way into that first round, maybe into the top half of the first round.
Right.
I know that there was a mock draft that came out on 24/7 Sports late last week that had Chop Robinson going in the top 15, I believe. So I think that
if that's what the industry analysts are saying, if that's what the NFL scouts, more importantly, are telling you when they send their feedback, Chop has been fun. Okay, that's great. If that's already the case, that's awesome. I was thinking, my thought still kind of is that he could end up in that stratosphere next year. But hey, if he's already there, then forget what I said.
I mean, with NFL scouts, I mean, it's can be kind of confusing sometimes, because there's certain cases where the on-field production matters, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the physical traits matter, sometimes they don't.
Odafe Oweh had 0 sacks his final season here. Everyone knows that story well. First round pick.
Exactly. So it's going to be curious to see. I think that there's a lot of these guys that Penn State has that are in that junior, third year class, even some of the fourth year redshirt junior guys, that the feedback that they get from the NFL, from evaluators, as they're trying to make their decision, the feedback they're getting from position coaches and James Franklin. It's going to be really interesting to see how that shapes, who stays, who goes. We talked about it after last season, where the fact that Penn State got a lot of these guys to come back who had eligibility remaining was kind of a coup for James Franklin. We're out there at the Rose Bowl, and that whole week, it's all these different guys announcing they're coming back for another season. Is there going to be a similar feeling this year? It's going to be, I'm very curious to see what the landscape looks like, but I do think that Chop Robinson coming into the season, I do think that I felt like that he was a surefire first rounder, um, and like surefire to leave. But now at this point, I could maybe see it a little bit more. I mean, I'm personally of the mindset that if you have the chance to go get paid and make real money on a real contract, I know you can make a lot off of NIL, but there's a little bit of a difference between that and being on that NFL contract and playing for a second contract and the chance to make truly life-changing money. So I don't know. Chop Robinson, I think that he's going to be one that, in terms of the things to monitor, from the end of the Michigan State game to the bowl game, that whole month, he's going to be someone that I think that we're all going to have our eyes on.
It feels like that would be a very big roster win. You got one last year with Olu Fashanu, and then you had a few others that were maybe a little less splashy, but we thought maybe on the fence with the guys like Curtis Jacobs and Adiza Isaac. And I think it's proven that both of those guys are going to stand to gain off of coming back. But yeah, it'll be curious to watch. Those are the kind of conversations that pop up here. Who do you think, and I'm just going to throw it to you without looking at the stat sheet, Daniel, through 11 games now, 1 game left on the schedule. Who leads this Nittany Lions defense in total tackles now?
Is it Kobe King?
It is Kobe King, a man who has played about 180 to 200 fewer snaps than guys like Abdul Carter and KJ Winston, and Kalen King is his twin brother. Those guys have been mainstays. They've been out there every snap. And Curtis Jacobs, for the most part, has been as well. Of late, a little bit less for him. Kobe King has pretty much played 60 to 70% of the snaps as the other starting linebackers. That has changed lately. I spoke with Kobe after this game. I know his confidence is very high. I know he's very excited to go home to Detroit and play Michigan State in a Black Friday showcase kind of setting. But we've got to acknowledge he's caught fire a bit. And James Franklin took some time in his opening statement to mention what he feels like Kobe King has accomplished this season. I know that folks were maybe looking for a little more fireworks from that middle linebacker position early in the season. I think you got really reliable play there, and you got a strong, accountable, reactive play there. Now I think you're seeing some authority pop up with Kobe King, and that can change the way this linebacker core plays for the remainder of the season. And to me, makes me really curious about what the middle linebacker position can look like for this defense in 2024, because I think it can be at a different level than really it's been in quite some time, quite frankly, if Kobe King can build off the way he's playing right now.
You look at what he did today: 10 tackles, 5 solo, a half tackle for loss, a quarterback hurry. That's pretty good for a middle linebacker, especially making those plays behind the line of scrimmage. Because I think sometimes we see Kobe King do a lot of his work there in the second level. But I think that's something that you just brought up that we noticed the past couple weeks when Penn State goes to nickel. They, at the beginning of the year, Kobe King was going off and Daquan Hardy was coming on. In recent weeks, Kobe King has been staying on and Curtis Jacobs has been going off. I know that some of it might have to do with playing these a little bit more run-heavy teams, like a Rutgers, like a Michigan. But I think that it also shows that Penn State has a little bit more confidence in Kobe King they have the confidence in him to be able to play in space a little bit, to play against those types of sets, which is something that I think wasn't necessarily maybe his reputation or our expectation of him coming into the year. But I mean, he's someone that since he got on campus, we obviously have been hearing about Kalen King since day one. That would kind of bring along Kobe a little bit into some of the conversations. But I think the one thing that we heard about him was kind of team captain material. I think that's something that's been, his intangibles have been talked about a lot since he first got here. And when you look at a middle linebacker and what you're supposed to do, I think that that's something that you want. And I think that maybe it took him a little bit longer to get there than maybe his brother. But I think that Kobe King has put himself in a position to be a really key player on this defense at linebacker. I think that's really cool to see that kind of development for him over the course of these 3 years he's been on campus.
And his physical development is something he's totally changed his diet. He's a guy that they had to kind of, he didn't have a big body fat percentage, so they had to kind of find new ways to squeeze everything out of him. I mean, this is a guy who I mean, I was speaking with him after post game, and there's really no more room on that frame, and it's just a different build than his brother, Kalen King, who's that kind of more wiry built cornerback. But Kobe King goes home on a high note right now. I'm really curious to see how he finishes out the regular season. And how we can build off this. And number 2 on the team in tackles now is KJ Winston. He put together another very productive game. He had his first career interception. I know you spoke with him. And Johnny Dixon at cornerback, while we're speaking about the defensive secondary, he comes crashing through for another sack. And if you've seen that before, it's because you have. He has 4 sacks on the season now. That leads all cornerbacks across the country at the FBS level. He already led all cornerbacks across the country through 10 games. He tacks on another today. And you go back to last season, that's 7 sacks across the last couple of years. Terry Smith said, folks, Johnny Dixon's going to make himself some money this year. He told us back in September that Johnny Dixon is an NFL prospect on the rise. This guy does a lot of things, and he can play a lot of different roles, I think, at the next level. His stock is going up.
Oh, for sure. And you think about the last year, I think we were maybe into October and Johnny Dixon was still leading the team in sacks. We were still waiting for guys like Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac to really get going. And so I think that versatility for him has been really, really good. And I think it was kind of cool today to see him alter things throughout the game. He had a play early in the game where he rushed off the edge, hesitated a little bit against Wimsett, and it let Wimsett get upfield, get by him for a gain. The second time, this time with the sack, we saw him, no hesitation, just went straight through, got there, got him onto the ground. So to see that, kind of progression throughout the game, I think that it shows the type of player that Johnny Dixon is. He's someone that didn't have the same reputation as Kalen King coming into the year. He's not like Daquan Hardy, where he's been here for 5 years and everyone knows his story because James Franklin and Terry Smith tell it all the time. I think that Johnny Dixon was a little bit more under the radar as the transfer from South Carolina. I think that when Penn State goes into the transfer portal, he's going to be a guy that they point to, especially when they're looking at younger players after their first and second seasons. Like, look at what Johnny Dixon did. He came, had a bit role in his first year and then did more and more over those next 2 years, made himself a lot of money. And then KJ Winston, it was pretty cool talking to him after the game because he was genuinely excited about that interception. That he said that he couldn't believe it when he looked down in his hands and saw that he had the ball. And he talked about it where he read the play, that he figured out a tell from the first half from Gavin Wimsett and the wide receiver. And he knew that there was going to be a blitz. He knew that the wide receiver was going to be hot. He knew where the ball was going to go and when it was going to happen. And I didn't think it was a particularly good throw by Wimsett, but KJ Winston was there and made a really nice play to reel in that diving interception. He's a guy that in the spring, players were saying that he's a potential All-American. And we saw him really, really lock down that starting spot next to Jalen Reed. Neither of them have really come off the field this year. And I think that's pretty big for KJ Winston moving forward. And then I asked Keaton Ellis about after the game about KJ Winston getting that interception. And Keaton Ellis said that he was going crazy on the sideline, that he thought it was just the coolest thing to see KJ make that play because they know the type of player he is. They know the type of work that he puts in. And now he's getting rewarded for it. And Keaton was like, I remember what my first one was like. And he knows it's a really, really special moment. And I think that he was really happy that he got to witness that today on the field.
We'll talk more about big picture where this defense is through 11 games on Monday's episode. But let's finish with some Alex Felkin's appreciation segment. I feel like it's a weekly spot on the Postgame Podcast, win or lose. He's now 16 of 19 on the season. That's 84% on field goals. And he's putting together one of the most impressive seasons for any place kicker in Penn State history. And this is coming off a game one where we saw the place kicker benched when it was the prevalent talk of conversation about potential concerns for this team. It's way down that list now, Daniel. And Alex Felkins, who is done with the eligibility, there's no chance he's coming back in 2024. So that is going to be an interesting situation for Penn State at place kicker, but continues to get it done. 49-yarder. It was one where if he misses that, the Beaver Stadium crowd turns on Franklin again, potentially, because it was a 4th and 1 situation. It was following a spot where you go for it on 4th and short at the 4-yard line. And then you get a 4th and 1 spot there. Right on the edge of territory where you consider it. They go to Felkins. He delivers, as he has time and time again. And I know you caught up with him briefly after the game as well.
Yeah, he said that this was kind of what he came to Penn State for, to be able to deliver in these types of moments, and he felt that to have that opportunity on his own senior day was really, really big for him. I think that he was definitely one of the more underrated additions coming out of the portal. When you think back to December when he announced his commitment to come here, you knew what Penn State already had on the roster. You knew that Sanders Sahadak was there. But at the same time, you knew that the specialist was something that James Franklin was really, really going to pay attention to and really, really try to put together the right group that could have success there. And I think they really did hit a home run with Alex Felkins, and you spin things forward a little bit. And if you have to go portal shopping for specialists again, you can say, hey, look, we had a career 66% field goal kicker from the Ivy League come in. He's an 84% kicker now. We let him take kicks in big spots. He delivered. If you can come in and you can contribute, we're going to put you out there. So I think it's pretty cool for him. Falcon said that one of his, that a group of his best friends from Oklahoma, where he's from, were at the game. And for them to see him, kick in Beaver Stadium, he said it was a really, really special moment for him. And I think that he's another guy that his experience at Penn State, I think, has maybe set him up for a future that might not necessarily have been on the table or as much on the table a year ago.
Overshadowed by Falcons, but continuing to get it done. Riley Thompson, he had a couple big punts today, a 52-yarder, and then I think the other was a 48-yarder, or I'm sorry, 56-yarder and a 48-yarder. The 56 one was one they needed. They needed some breathing room out of their own end zone, and he delivered it. So he didn't really, fortunately for Penn State, they didn't have to turn to the punter as much as they have in some of these recent Big Ten matchups. And Riley Thompson, though, when called upon, again, getting it done. He's a guy that we're a little bit more murky right now. He's an international journey to Penn State. So we're starting, and he played some Australian rugby. So we got a little bit to figure out with him moving ahead. Finishing out here, Daniel, with something that's a little bit beyond the box score, certainly beyond the box score, is the emotions that went into this. And you're always wondering, where does the motivation come from this week, particularly when you see one of the primary members of your program get the boot. That's going to be jarring for everybody. And it sounds like the focal point, at least for a percentage of this locker room, a significant one, was rallying around James Franklin, maybe being a little bit pissed off about some of the things they heard said about their head coach, whether that was in person while they exited Beaver Stadium last week, or they went over to Twitter and took a peek at that firestorm. Whatever they did, it seemed like they found motivation. Theo Johnson, in particular, during postgame, a team captain, an emotionally charged player for this team, stepped up and said some really strong words and appreciation of his head coach in front of the team. Led to some emotions from the head coach, but what we're told from some people who were in that room. But overall, I don't know, if one of those late season galvanizing kind of things, whatever you want to talk to when you're trying to finish strong and build toward 2024. And James Franklin certainly wasn't an easy week for him, but as he keeps telling us, he said it a few times in the last couple of days, he gets paid to have this responsibility. This is ultimately everything under his roof is his responsibility. It seems like some players noticed that maybe the things were piling on those shoulders, and they wanted to pat him on the back just a bit.
Yeah, James Franklin was asked about the culture of this team, and he said that in the locker room, he said that he wished we could have been in there to hear some of the guys talk, and he mentioned Devon Ellis and Theo Johnson as two guys who talked, and Franklin didn't give really any details on it. And then the players come out and we start asking them, and you start hearing from all these different guys about what they were saying. And it sounded like Theo Johnson got up and had a lot to say about James Franklin. And in talking to Theo after the game, he kind of framed it as James Franklin does so much for them. I think that one of the phrases that he used was that James Franklin protects them, and that he is the one. And we see it too from what James Franklin does, where he comes out to those press conferences and, he won't throw players under the bus. He, won't single out guys individually publicly. And he's talked to us about, wanting to keep that locker room together, keep it intact. And I think that for Theo Johnson, this was kind of his way of thanking him for that, and showing his appreciation. And I think Theo said that it's not something that you hear often too, is that it's not often you hear about players really thanking their coach like this. It's always the coach thanking the players, and that sort of emotion. And he said that he caught James Franklin by surprise a little bit, and that it was something that the coach really, really appreciated. And I think that we've talked a lot about what this leadership was going to look like this year, what kind of leaders were going to be there. And I think that this was a team that, I think partly because you didn't have necessarily the Sean Clifford and Jair Brown types, guys that are really kind of beacons in there. I think that this team probably was maybe centered on James Franklin a little bit more, than maybe last year's team was. As kind of their tone setter and person that they look to really set things up. And I think that this was Theo Johnson's way of saying thank you on his senior day. Theo Johnson said that his moment coming out of the tunnel and being there with James Franklin and his family was really, really special to him. He said that he still has to make a decision after, and he's going to wait until after the Michigan State game to really consider that. He can come back for the 5th year next year. But I think that it was kind of cool. It was something different to hear.
Yeah.
Senior day, it's always emotional. Stories kind of always pop up in different ways, and this was a pretty unique one today, I think.
I think there's so many weeks and there's so many instances where James Franklin brings some outside noise purposely inside the building to fire up his guys. And I think his guys got fired up by the noise that was being directed at him this time.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit of a kind of a role reversal. And I don't know if James Franklin sensed that during the week, and I'm sure he does now. This isn't just something that popped up on Theo Johnson's mind in postgame. This is something that was clearly brewing within this team over the course of the week. And you can understand why it might be when your leader and the guy who many of them consider to be a secondary father figure in their lives is being publicly questioned and called out and maybe saying he should be fired, depending on where you're getting your news from. That you can understand why it might be a galvanizing moment. And I think we'll see if it carries forward. But right now, that's what this end of the season, once you pick up that second loss, it's all about where's your trajectory as a program. That's all that matters. Once you're out of the college football playoff and championships are off the table and all that thing, to me, it's all about where is the trajectory of your program. And that starts with the spearhead, your leader. And how does that go all the way down, trickle down to the culture of your locker room? James Franklin sounded very confident about it. Based on what we heard from the players, Kobe King echoed a lot of what Theo Johnson said with James Franklin. It's in a good place. But you got to get through this Michigan State matchup, I think, and catch your breath a little bit and let everybody kind of prepare for what we expect to be a marquee matchup if they get to 10-2. But Daniel, they get to 9-2 first. It's 27-6 victory over Rutgers. As we just covered, a lot of layers to this one. Anything to throw on the table before we say goodbye?
No, I mean, I think kind of going back to what I said at the top of the show, you think back, 12 weeks ago, we're podcasting at 4 a.m. after the West Virginia game. And I remember there was something that I wanted to be my closing thought, but I couldn't get it because it was so late. And then I remembered it obviously the next day when I woke up. But after that game, Drew Allar was asked something about his, emotions or thoughts on the game. And, he made the point that you only get so many of these games. Football is different than all these other sports where in college you're only guaranteed 12, which is not very many in the grand scheme of things when you factor in the proportion of work that they put in. And I remember thinking about that night and being like, All right, so there's a lot of weeks ahead, but this could go pretty fast. And I think that wrapping up tonight, leaving Beaver Stadium, it was kind of like, yeah, this did go by pretty fast. It was a roller coaster. There's still a couple more rises and drops coming on it, I think. But yeah, I mean, we're 11 weeks into this, and Penn State's 9-2, and it really does almost feel like yesterday it was the West Virginia game, and just kind of how this game works.
I don't know if I say this every single year come like Thanksgiving time, but this sincerely felt like the fastest. I'm not even going back to the opener. Thinking back to that open scrimmage that we got to go out to on the practice fields in early August, and we were like, oh my gosh, we're gonna watch Drew Allar go against the defense finally. And like just the anticipation of getting to peel back the curtain a little bit on the Penn State football team and what we thought it might look like. And now where we are, 4 months later, 4.5 months later. And I'm reminded every year, and especially on a senior day, these teams, they change so fast. You start to get a read on a team, and this one's been tough to get a read on in a lot of ways, but you start to get a feel for the team. You start to get a sense for where the culture is, and all of a sudden it's time for 25 guys to move on, and it's time to bring in 20 new freshmen and 6 new transfer portal guys and try to do it all again. And you're moving around the staff, and it's just every single team is so different. And hey, we'll give this team another 120 minutes to show us what they're all about. They got the Michigan State matchup on Black Friday. We're going to come to you with an episode Monday and Tuesday this upcoming week, and then we won't be back with you until Friday night after that Michigan State matchup. And then we wait for a bowl destination. That'll come in early December when we'll know what Penn State's doing for game number 13. For now, after game number 11, on behalf of Daniel Gallen, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to catch out all of our post-game coverage and coverage into game week number 12 at lions247.com.